What's up, Pirates? Wraith and Jim here, back with AwakenedTCG, and today we have a brand new video to show you guys. So today, we're going to be talking about the OP05 meta over in Asia. So we're in OP04, but they've been on OP05 for a while now. I think since August, if I'm not mistaken, since the end of August. And so we're kind of going to take a look at some of the results that they recently had and kind of just really dissect what's going on over there and kind of just to show you guys what's happening so we can be more prepared for when we get it in December.
Yep, and we've got a fantastic graph here that is going to show us basically what the entire meta is consisting of in Asia, provided to us by OP Hirata on Twitter. If you guys can give them a follow, they make great graphs that are just great for dissections like this. But this is going to be the 3-day span, probably the weekend of October 7th to October 9th. And in this span, they have collected 7,278 different entries from games. So this is probably from tournaments that went on over this weekend. This is all the decks that were played. A total of 7,278 decks to be exact. And we have our circular graph here that's going to give us the distribution of leaders based on how many were played and entered in these tournaments. So number one here, we've got, by a long shot, Purple Luffy at about 1,600 entrants. Insane that purple goes from OP04 being the least playable color by far to now the most playable color with one leader.
Yeah, I mean, this leader is pretty insane. It's a better Whitebeard in my opinion. Obviously, you don't get the 6K stat line, but you get to ramp a Dawn, and so more often than not, by turn 4, you're already at 10 Dawn, which swings the games like crazy. And not only that, you're ramping an active Dawn, so every single one of your turns, you're already ramp 1 higher Dawn than your opponent. You do that 2 turns in a row, now you're 2 Dawn above your opponent, and so it just gets out of hand. You can play these huge bodies and just never let your opponent ever have a chance to compete with you, right? And so that's the strength with Purple Luffy. So yeah, this one leader definitely takes OP05 by storm, and if you're trying to play competitively, this is probably the #1 deck that you want to try to play in order to be successful competitively.
Not to mention, this deck is actually really cheap. It runs a lot of vanillas from like OP01 and stuff, and the first starter decks. I think if you buy a Purple Kaido starter deck, you basically have like over half of this deck already. So somehow this leader has made those cards now infinitely better. But if you are looking forward to playing Purple Luffy, there's some great matches online you can check out and watch how to play this deck. It looks like it's a lot of fun. But at number 2, at 906 competitors, we have Enel. Enel is number 2 here, our new yellow leader coming in OP05. 2 new leaders are our top 2, which I think is a good thing. I don't think it would be good if we kept having the old Laws and Zoros, etc. as our best and most played leaders. That would just make this game go stale, to be honest. So I think it's good that the new leaders are now the best leaders. But Enel, if you haven't seen, is just... it's like Queen on steroids. You gain life consistently and constantly, and he is the most sticky and unkillable leader in the game by far. If you do not have at least 3 swings in 1 turn, you can't kill him. And that's hoping they don't hit a trigger. So this deck is just really annoying. I think there's a lot of luck involved with it, but its strength is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, it's definitely the second strongest deck in OP05 by far, and obviously we're looking at the data points, and you can kind of see that kind of grouped up with Katakuri being the 3rd most played here. Between those two yellow decks and Purple Luffy, they take up almost half of the entire chart, and so that should go to show and tell you how strong those decks are. And so if you, like I said, if you're trying to play competitive decks, I think Enel and Purple Luffy are definitely ones to look into. Enel is more on the expensive side, so I definitely suggest Purple Luffy. But yeah, the Enel leader effect is just way too strong to take it lightly, and then of course the triggers just add that extra element.
Yep. And next up, right behind Katakuri and not too far from Enel, we have another new leader. Is going to be blue and black Sakazuki at 790 entrants, 10% of the graph. But this leader is a good leader. I think it's really good. The blue and black color combination is kind of gross because these bottom deck effects in blue are already the best removal in the game. And adding black on top of that just makes them hit anything on the board. So you're basically playing on curve and getting rid of anything they throw down, even if it's something like a Marco who's immune to the KO effects. You are not immune to bottom deck effects. So this deck is basically just play on curve. You get a free cycle every turn to try to find what you need. It's a great deck, but I think it has a lot of rough matchups, and that's why it's not going to be one of our top contenders. And you're kind of running low with cards in hand the entire game with this deck, so it can definitely be pretty bricky from what I've seen, but it's a good deck and a fun deck, and also a pretty high skill cap deck from what I've seen.
Yeah, I've none. I don't have too much to say on Sakazuki. One of the better decks for sure still, regardless if it can be a little bricky and it having kind of more of a rougher matchup spread against all the decks in the meta. I think it's still a solid choice, right behind Enel and Purple Luffy. So definitely want to take a look into that one. If you're a blue player, obviously this is probably going to be your best shot on that color. And so, yeah, he is a good third choice.
Yep. And let's just go over a couple more decks here. We're going to go over Green Uta real quick. This 10-7 was actually the day this deck got released. So a ton of people were just say, I'm going to try out the new deck. And that's probably why this is so high. But that's not to say this deck is bad. We're about to get into the win percentages of these decks. And you're going to be surprised where Uta is. But this is probably a great deck. And if people are performing well on this on day one, with a decent amount of entrants, that is actually pretty impressive for this deck in the future. But last up, let's just talk about Law and Zoro. Two OP01 decks that have been consistently good since OP01. I know they both have pretty good matchups into Purple Luffy, I think, or do they have good matchups into Enel? I'm not actually sure. I just know. Do you know?
I don't think they have necessarily favorable matchups, but definitely they could definitely do damage. I feel like Enel, it's I think around closer to 50%. I would say it's 50-50. Purple Luffy kind of just runs away with every matchup. It's kind of hard to stop it. But yeah, I think like you said, obviously these are OP01 leaders. Been consistent throughout basically all of OP01 to now OP05. You kind of still see, some of them topping here and there. I think one thing to note though, before I talk further on Zoro and Law, is we don't see Whitebeard on here at all. Whitebeard has since gone extinct. He had its run, but now there's just leaders with some great abilities that overcome that 6,000 power leader, 6 life. Kind of just too strong for it to handle, as Whitebeard doesn't have anything fancy. It's just playing on curve big bodies and then hoping to swing for a game at one of your later turns. But yeah, Law and Zoro definitely have what it takes to beat both Purple Luffy and Enel. And so, but I am surprised that they're very low, and Red is slowly starting to not be a part of the meta anymore.
Yeah, very interesting. Zoro, Law, and Whitebeard were obviously our top three, looking in OP04, 2, and 3 for the most part. So, very surprising to see that just one of them has disappeared, being Whitebeard. I think it's probably the prevalence of Enel, as Whitebeard has a lot of these big bodies on board and not a ton of swings, and that's what Enel kind of feeds off. If you you need 3 swings minimum to beat this leader in one turn. So that issue, especially with Enel's removal and these big bodies that are going to swing back and get rid of your attackers, I don't think Whitebeard really fares well against a lot of these top decks.
Yeah, 100% agreed.
But anyways, the rest of these guys are just kind of underplayed decks like Queen and Red Purple Law and some other ones down here. But Not very important, as those are not the big meta contenders. I think Queen is pretty good into Enel, and that's why some people have decided to play it. But nothing of note there. And last up here, we've got from 10-7 to 10-9 once again. It is going to be all those leaders put together, their games they played. It's going to be the win rates of every leader. So first up here, you're not going to believe it. It is Green UTA at almost a 60% win rate on day one, mind you. I think this is attributed to a lot of people probably not knowing and not being ready for this deck. But you gotta understand that this is also the first time, at least, people are getting their hands physically on this deck, that they didn't test it online yet. So, a very strong leader, I think. 600 entrants, which is a sizable amount of entrants. This isn't some UTA specialist. This is a lot of people playing this deck on day one, and it gets a 60% win rate. That is very, very interesting for a day one leader.
Yeah, that is absurd, and it's not like this deck brings anything new to the table. It's just consistency when it comes to searching your film cards and drawing, right? So it just allows you to have an extra draw per turn and a film card at that, and then basically with all the green strengths, and you have, you know, your Nami searcher for more film cards. Maybe you just don't run out of Luffy's to drop when your opponent does stabilize and clear it. You're just, you know, dropping another Luffy combo. Maybe that's the issue, because this deck honestly does not have, like I said, anything special. It's just more draw, and so maybe that draw is enough to basically counteract the bad sides of kind of green film kid before. Maybe this draw just gives it that extra, you know, consistency it needs when it comes to, you know, being a top tier 1 deck.
Yep, consistency and having a lot of options and cards in hand is kind of what runs this game. It's why Whitebeard was good for so long. So maybe UTA is kind of doing that same thing, but we will see. This was only day 1 through 3 of the leader being out. But next up, we've got at around 69-68% win rate. It is going to be red. What is that? Oh, fuck. That's a Whitebeard. What the fuck? Whitebeard is at 68% win rate.
58.
Yeah, sorry, 58% win rate for Whitebeard.
But let's go to the other graph and check how much entrants on Whitebeard there were, right? So
right here, he's at 49 players, which is not a ton, to be fair. But that is interesting. I'm actually surprised. I guess people just don't like the leader. That is a really high win rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think other than Enel and probably Purple Luffy, it probably just has a good matchup spread into other decks, but it for sure gets washed by Enel.
Right, which is why I was so surprised at looking upon the first graph, why it wasn't like present in the main graph at all. I guess people just don't enjoy this deck, or it's kind of a situation where maybe the NL matchup is so bad and it's such a popular deck that people just don't want to play it, because they're obviously going to run into a matchup that is like 90-10. So it would make sense why people don't want to play it, but I mean 69% win rate is pretty insane. So next up, we've got yellow NL. A ton of entrants and a high win rate is basically telling you a deck is good. If a lot of these people are on it, probably going to have a lot of people that aren't the best at the deck, just because the more people you have, the more bad players you're going to have. And this deck still has a good win rate, about 53, maybe 54% win rate. Pretty good. Better than Purple Luffy. So possibly contender for the best deck in the meta.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe it has a better matchup spread, and maybe that's why it has a slightly more. I mean, obviously it's not too much. We're going to take a look at the graph further on. What is that next? Is that Red Green Law?
That is Red Green Law, yes.
So Red Green Law, of course, not as much entrance, but obviously that win rate is still above 50%. Anything above 50% is definitely a W. I think this deck kind of fell off as there's more answers to Law now in the meta, and then especially in OP06, I'm gonna go ahead and make a prediction and say we're gonna see maybe even less laws. There's a lot of answers now. And you kind of want to play the new fresh decks where the abilities are slowly starting to get stronger, the leader abilities, and the characters are slowly starting to get stronger. So obviously power creep is definitely a thing in this game, and it's eventually going to turn to where all these older cards are definitely going to get um, uh, outdated, and we're going to play only the new stuff. But they're doing a great job of integrating the newer cards with the older cards as of right now. And so obviously, like, we still see red green law winning, topping, and doing great. So obviously that's a good sign in that term. But yeah, red green law still a strong deck, definitely a meta contender.
Yep. And next up, we've got the king of OP05. It's going to be purple Luffy. With this mini entrance, well above any deck, and still being above 50%, yeah, this deck is really, really good. There is no doubting that. That is why so many people are playing it. But with that many players comes a lot of bad players, and also more losses with more players. But yeah, this deck is fantastic. I don't think there's much to say. It has about a 52-53% win rate with by far the most entrants. So if you want to play purple Luffy, you definitely should. This is a great deck. And next up, let's look at these two yellow decks right here. We've got Yellow Mom actually beating out Yellow Katakuri in win rate just by a little smidge. Yellow Mom about 52 and Katakuri about 51 to 52. But interesting that Yellow Mom has a higher win rate. I'm guessing it's just because the people that play it kind of specialize, while Katakuri, as you saw, was a big chunk of the graph. So you're going to have a lot more losses there and a lot more players that aren't the best. But very interesting. This deck is definitely still really good if you want to play Yellow Mom. Like I do enjoy playing Yellow Mom over Katakuri just because you don't have to rely on putting triggers in your life from the start. You can just choose the ones you want. It's definitely a great deck, and one you can definitely play in OP05 and still in OP04.
And then what is that other one above 50% in the middle? There's that Film Kid.
It is Green Kid, yes.
Green Kid. Okay, whether that be Supernova or Film Kid, still above 50% win rate. That is the other only mono green leader that is actually viable. If you get yourself into a great position, you can always double 12k swing with your leader. It's hands down one of the best effects still. Blocking out two 12k attacks, especially when you have no blockers up and you only have a hand to defend with, can definitely get scary. So yeah, that's obviously a great deck still, but maybe the new UTA leader is definitely gonna become the number one mono green leader. So I'll definitely keep my eye on that. And then obviously, last but not least, the only other one that's close to a 50% win rate is that Sakazuki.
Yep.
Yeah, Sakazuki there. Obviously, it does have a nice chunk of data points, got a good chunk of matches that were recorded, slowly inching towards that 50%, not quite hitting it. But I think it's still definitely a good deck. But basically, everything under there, it basically tells you that you can still win games, but it just has a harder matchup spread into the meta, into the overall range of decks that you're going to run into. So it will make it harder for you to win from a competitive standpoint. But that doesn't go to say that you can't win with these decks.
100%, yeah. Like Blue Black Sakazuki, there was a decent chunk there. And it's like right under 50%. It's basically 50%. You can still totally win with this deck. But you definitely need to see pretty good matchups, and you need to be very good at the deck, because I think it's kind of difficult to pilot. And then the rest of these decks that are below that, all of these are pretty much underplayed decks, and they're also under 50% win rate, which kind of shows you that they aren't good just because the only people playing these decks are the people that are like kind of specializing in them. So the fact that they have under 50% just shows that these are not the best decks in the meta. There are no sleeper picks. The only sleeper pick apparently is Whitebeard, according to this graph, which is very interesting that they are sleeping on Whitebeard after I know Asia loved that deck last meta.
Yeah, maybe it does have to do with
having
maybe
one
all the
very
Whitebeard players.
Matchup.
Yeah, all the Whitebeard players that are still on Whitebeard are obviously the specialists, because Whitebeard is one of those decks where it's not too fun to actually play, at least from a personal perspective. But I know the Whitebeard players over here in our meta are killers. The Whitebeard players over here do not play around, and so Um, yeah, I mean, tough matchups into the top two decks, but maybe it's just one of those decks where it's a sleeper pick. You never know. All right, Pirates, thank you guys so much for sticking to the end of this video. We really hope you guys enjoyed our discussion on kind of where the meta is at in Asia. Currently, obviously, they still have about a month and a half left to go before OP06 does actually release for them. And for us, we will be getting OP05. But kind of take a look at these results and kind of formulate an opinion of your own. Obviously, you guys heard our thoughts. Yeah, but basically, we just want to kind of show it off and have a better understanding of what's going to be going on moving forward for us in a couple months here. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, so stop right now, hit that sub button for me, please. I'd really appreciate it. And make sure to comment down below what deck you're going to be playing in OP05. I'd really like to know. And I'll be in the comment sections waiting for you guys so we can have some conversations. I'll see you guys on the next video. You guys have a good one. Peace.